Hello and welcome to another Drive with Me video. This is kind of a new thing I've started recently, but I kind of like the format. The audio may not be perfect, the videos can be a little shaky, but I like the off the cuff nature that this allows for. So I think I'm probably going to be recording more of these at least in the near future. So I'm continuing to kind of test out this particular format for recording videos and seeing how it continues to work out. So while I have a number of things on my mind just generally throughout the day that I often would like to talk about, I try to take a mental note and be like, "Oh, I'll put that kind of content or thoughts into a video." Today, I wanted to kind of focus on some general thoughts about how life is going in the United States financially as a millennial that's trying to build a life and have kids and is currently married and so on. And my wife and I have three children, and we've moved states from California to Arizona in partially an attempt to be able to just lower our cost of living so we can pay off debts and hopefully own a home. So right now, my parents have been kind enough to basically rent out a home that they have and used to live in to us, but it is small, only about 1,100 square feet, and a lot of their things are still in it. A lot of their furnishings and whatnot, so we're having to pay for a fairly large storage unit, and there's a lot of things we kind of can't touch and move, and things like that. So it's a decent setup, all things considered. It absolutely could be worse, right? But we are actively moving and working towards something different. And what I'd really like, especially because my parents' property is in a really strict HOA that Arizona is apparently notorious for. It's a pretty small piece of land. I think the whole thing is like a quarter acre, if that. And it's really pretty. It's like in a little forested kind of nook of northern Arizona here, and lots of gorgeous plants and stuff like that in the backyard. And there's some verticality to it because it's built into a hill. But this is my wife and I have agreed this is not where we want to stay. And we're also seeing like the electricity bill, and while it's not what it was in California, our utilities and rent and everything else is still expensive. And this is with like a family discount. So I find myself, and so does my wife. We really want our own land, and we really want to not necessarily homestead, but definitely live as close to off grid as is realistically possible. And it'll likely be a step by step process and involve kind of a slow buildup of things like, solar panels and a battery system for storing that electricity generated by the panels, and maybe a rainwater collection system with filtration and pumps and all that kind of stuff that goes with it. Ideally, some kind of gardening and instituting our own food production would be great. So I mean, there a variety of options and things we can do. But I've been spending a lot of time on YouTube watching a whole bunch of like homesteading and off-grid living, and it definitely seems possible, very doable. But the step by step is definitely going to be challenging. And the thing is I have a master's degree in psychology, and I'm currently working as a therapist. So my construction skills or ability to put things together are exactly zero. Like, well, in terms of any kind of professional level, like I've built sheds with my dad, and my grandfather was a handyman, and my parents owned like rentals properties. So I go in and like maintain swamp coolers and air conditioners, and replace toilets and the wax rings that go with them, and basic replacing door handles and patching up walls and painting and things like that. A lot of like basic maintenance work. So I know how to maintain many things on the interior of the home, but in terms of building it or doing any kind of complex plumbing or electrical, I got nothing. So this will be an interesting process because I don't know how much is going to be like, where is that line between what's better for a professional to pay for and what is worth trying to learn to do yourself, even if it doesn't come out perfectly. And my guess is there's certain things like laying a foundation and doing concrete work and so on, probably best left to a professional. Probably same thing with electrical, and honestly probably with plumbing, right? But then are there other things that are worth, like, I don't know, maybe framing, that it'd be worth me learning how to do? I'm not saying it's easy, I just mean maybe things that aren't quite as, I don't know, I'm just kind of speculating here is the point. So the bottom line is life is getting expensive in the United States, and it's not on accident, and it's going to continue so long as we have our current political regime. And I don't just mean the current presidential administration, I mean the political way of thought that we generally collectively call the neoliberal order, which has existed really powerfully in the United States since the 1980s, but realistically was gaining power and developing its kind of core principles back in the 60s and 70s as well. Probably starting even before that, my understanding is there were concepts and like memos and things going around as far back as the 30s and 40s as kind of a reaction to the Franklin Roosevelt era New Deal policies. And so it probably was quite a while coming. From a political perspective. But that said, it is devastating our country slowly and over time, and it's using propaganda to try to elongate the amount of time it takes for the American public to really get angry about this and realize who the problem is. But slowly but surely, we're kind of collectively waking up. The elites are not just on the coast. They are wealthy individuals, extremely wealthy, like billionaires, centibillionaires that are all around the country, probably concentrated on the coast, but the majority of people that live there are not part of that group. So we've got ourselves a scenario where electricity in many places, like Northern California, where I grew up, was born and raised in like central Northern California. So not in the Bay Area, but in the valley that's just east of it. And the electricity there is basically monopolized by PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, due to contracts with the state of California. And they have been governed by a board of supervisors that is effectively, several of the members are appointed by the state, by the governor, I believe. And yet they routinely, even though they've been held liable in starting wildfires and not burying miles and miles of electrical line that they were claiming they were, and they were getting subsidies for it, they would get a slap on the wrist, get reorganized, get some new members on the board, and then get granted a major price hike, right? That they could then turn around and apply to the rest of us. So we are all paying, basically double dipping, for the privilege of paying more for our electricity while having generally a less safe environment, have the company lie to us about what they're actually doing to keep the electrical system safe. And it's getting to the point where even in an apartment that was just a 2-bedroom, 900 square foot thing, my wife and I were paying during the summer, $800, almost like $900 bills. I think the highest was almost $1,000. It was like $898, like $989. I think is like the highest, if I recall correctly, that we ever got. And it was those moments where I realized, one, this place clearly doesn't care about any kind of, if like we had single pane, terrible windows. The place was built back in the 70s and seemed like it hadn't been at all majorly renovated or changed since then. So we're over here trying to apply our own like weather stripping and like minor things we could do to help with our own power bill, and it helped a little bit. We tried to, we cut back, and our bills were still super high. And that's the reality for people living all over the United States, but particularly, like in my experience, it's definitely getting bad in California. So the cost of living there is truly just getting astronomical, and you own or earn just enough through the higher wages to survive, but not enough to actually thrive, pay off debts, which are inherent to, chasing the American dream and getting a college degree and all this, everything that's been wrapped into the middle class story, what it means to be a successful suburbanite in the United States, now comes with debt automatically, and then doesn't pay you enough to actually be able to pay them off, and definitely doesn't allow you to save up notably and really do things like save up for your child's, college fund, or have any kind of sizable piece of land or really move up the property ladder unless you're tapping into equity. That's if you can get on that property ownership ladder in the first place, which is increasingly difficult. I'm approaching 40 years old and have never actually owned a home, and it's a very frustrating experience when, per the rules, I've done everything right. I got a master's degree, and my wife and I earn six figures a year, but it doesn't ultimately matter even with the slightly lower Arizona tax rate. A bunch of our income is still taken because of our tax bracket federally, and then we're still trying to put into like retirement plans, and we still have three children we're taking care of, and we're trying to pay off debt and save up for a down payment. And so it really never has seemed to feel like we're doing okay, and we had to move across state lines just to get to the point that we could at least move in the right direction instead of backwards. And that is the story, or a similar story, for millions of Americans. And when you take all that together, like, there's a reason why I think so many of us like this idea of off-grid living and homesteading and so on. And it'd be nice to see us be able to organize and do some of this stuff collectively, like not necessarily somewhere between like a hippie commune and fully living out on your own in the middle of nowhere and it being just you responsible for your family. It'd be nice if we had some kind of community around that, like small town, I'm thinking like medieval villages that are almost like designed in like a circle where you have the town in the middle and then each of them has their own like piece of farmland around it. But it allowed for collective security and trade, and in the center of the city you'd have your blacksmiths and your repair workers for armor and whatever else, right? Leather workers and so on, tanners and your butchers and everything else. And that worked for over 600-700 years, like the better part of a millennia, that kind of system. And I believe that a lot of that came from kind of a Roman era system before that. So you're talking like humanity has figured out how to live in a fairly independent, decentralized way throughout its history, multiple times in many places, whether it's in the Americas, whether it's in modern day China or India or Europe or like North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. Like we humans are good at figuring out, collectively anyway, how to survive in a given environment. And our tool use and our social skills as a species are really what's made the difference and allowed us to excel in those particular areas. That said, this modern world, that we were all kind of sold a lie over the last century and a half, that industrialization and industrial electricity and municipal water supply and all this stuff, it was collective safety. And this was, not only was it convenience, but it was guaranteeing, to the best of our ability, the security of main like resources that are needed for as many people as possible. And then slowly, not only have we not invested in the infrastructure to maintain that and keep growing it at the rate our population is growing, but we've been making it more expensive for the same thing. Even while the United States is the largest oil producer in the world, our electricity prices have continued to go up. Right? Our labor and wage rates have never been, in my lifetime, have never kept up with inflation consistently. And if you look at the stats, we really haven't since the 1970s. And at least some of that seems to be tied to the fact that back in, what was it, 73, I believe, we decoupled the U.S. dollar from the value of from the gold standard. And ever since then, we have been effectively able to set our own goal rates, if you will, for inflation, for growth, for the money supply. And that inherently leads to people being able to be greedy, right? And so those at the top are like, well, it's easier for us if there's a looser money supply. And then we, of course, convince the small folk that that's good for them too, even though it inflates things. And a variety of regulations and rules and tax law and so on all create a scenario wherein inflation keeps outpacing us. And The workplace keeps getting worse, and labor laws have been slowly eroded over the course of decades. And now the workplace is terrible and doesn't pay you well for what you do, pretty much regardless of what you do, unless you own your own business. And particularly you're in the trades, the most likely scenario where you're able to do okay. And everything keeps getting more expensive around you, and we're seeing it's getting worse and worse year over year. And I think the 2020s, that is, have been a notable example of this, where grocery prices have kind of gotten out of hand, and housing has really seen an uptick, and inflation rates have been ridiculous, and our wages have just frankly in totality not kept up. And then even when things kind of seemingly calm down, we then have random oil shocks and a war in Iran we didn't need, and a disastrous, like years ago, pull out of in Afghanistan, and just like weird, strange political things going on, where apparently over the last like 10 years now, we've been electing guys that are in their 70s and 80s, which is into the presidency, and it's just been kind of ridiculous. Honestly, this has been an experiment, I think, this decade in how not to make things better. And I'm hoping we learn from this collectively as an American people. And it's not a right versus left, Republican versus Democrat comment. It is very much both sides are invested in many of the same principles that do not work towards the benefit of most of us. They do it differently, and yeah, they look a little bit more different, the parties do, than they have in the recent past. Like Trump and the MAGA movement has legitimately reshaped much of the Republican Party in a way that leaves the Democrats as the only truly neoliberal party standing. And yet the MAGA movement still holds a lot of those same values. So some of them are worse. So I wouldn't necessarily put all your eggs in either of those baskets. But that's just my thoughts on it. So I have definitely come to the conclusion that our government, regardless of level, whether it's federal, whether it's state, whether it's local, rarely, if ever, has our best interests at heart. And even if they do now, it's by no means a guarantee. And in fact, seems likely that at some point in the future, it won't, which means we really need to collectively try to take care of ourselves. And then you have a lot of rules and regulations, especially around construction, that seem to purposely prohibit things that would make people more resilient and self-sufficient, right? Limiters that you're starting to see around solar panels and rainwater collection and passive heating and cooling elements that can be built into a home and so on, because these things don't benefit builders. They don't benefit the oil industry. They don't benefit the lobbying efforts that actually own this country. And so we find ourselves wherein we're constantly squeezed, and they're trying to legislate any of our ways out. And so I think we need to collectively kind of just make it happen to the best of our ability and keep pushing back on that politically, yes, but also be willing to be a little civilly disobedient. Like, I don't care. I don't know whether or not Northern Arizona allows rainwater collection. I also don't care. I probably, once I have my own land, I'm going to try to build it anyway, regardless of whether or not they're certified installers. I'm going to try to figure that out, right? Installing solar panels, etc. Probably do the same kind of stuff. Like, I don't think solar panels are heavily restricted here, but nonetheless, this is it is a frustrating situation we find ourselves in, and America is already very obviously, yet painfully more so over time, owned by greed. And the only reasonable solution, in my mind, to countering and addressing this greed is to hedge your own bets, yourself individually, your families, us ourselves as a community and a society, against this, and reject the power that has built up in certain concentrated spots, whether it be, just really billionaires in general. You trace, it doesn't really matter the industry, just wherever those power pockets have emerged, we need to work on constructing alternative systems and pathways and supply chains and so on. And that is going to be a long and arduous process. And in the meantime, we we can still hope and push and advocate for a political revolution, but I think that's going to be it's going to be a process, and it's probably going to be quite a long time coming. I don't see this current political regime, which is so entrenched and has so much money and owns almost all of the media. It's very unlikely that it's going to collapse anytime soon. I think it's definitely got some life left in it. So in the meantime, whatever it means to you, we need to start working on making ourselves redundant and resilient, and then help our neighbors and each other do the same, and be willing to trade and join mutual aid groups and advocate for co-ops and advocate for labor rights again. Whether or not you personally like unions, I think is largely dependent on what kind of propaganda you bought into, because unions, while they did produce some bad results at times, there was some greed, there was some connection to organized crime, particularly in big cities like New York and Chicago. However, on the whole, labor unions were a counterbalance to raw business interest and their willingness and interest in spending big money in politics. And now that we've weakened labor over the course of decades, we're seeing the impact of that. So we need to bring back a balance, and restore labor unions. And honestly, I think we need to eventually make it an automatic part of our society, kind of like, the ability to vote. It's something that everybody has the right to do, and the organization automatically exists. So you don't vote to unionize; it's automatically part of a union. We just help, work on the contract. And if you want to be a part of union activities and benefit from some of the specifics of the union, then you pay your dues. And if not, then you generate, or you don't participate, but you probably would still get the benefits of higher wages anyway. You just wouldn't be, represented by the union and so on in case of disciplinary issues and so on. But on the whole, I know that like Amazon and Walmart and these other companies are known for really trash talking organized labor. But the reality is, there's a reason why they're doing that, and it's good to train your mind to be suspicious of anything that big business advocates for or against. Sometimes they really are advocating for things that are in our best interest, but only because it's in theirs as well, right? So even when they're doing good, it almost never is just altruistic. Like the people that run these companies are by and large, by design, somewhat sociopathic, because those are the kind of CEOs and board members that make it there and stay there and are successful. So we need to realize that our society is ruled by those that do not give a damn and are only in their place of power because they don't give a damn. And that's not going to change until we force it to change collectively. And that is not an easy process, but we can do it. We've done more in the past. So, anyway, I'll get off of my soapbox for now. Thanks for watching this Drive With Me video. And if you like what you heard or just find it generally interesting, feel free to stick around, because we'll be talking more about these kind of topics. So, take care.